we still have a scarcity of competent individuals.
Think about what you are interested in and most passionate about, and then choose a pathway into that.
You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and step out your comfort zone.
Hello and welcome to My Green Future, where we look at career planning through a green lens.
Our guest on today's conversation is Tom Rippin. He began his career as a PhD student in biochemistry with a goal of becoming an academic. He ended up running and founding On Purpose, a course in which he trains other people to have more purposeful careers.
But what I loved about his career story was that he used his work engaging with partnerships and different programs on the ground to turn it into a meaningful program for other people to bring purpose to their careers.
It's a very interesting and wide-ranging perspective he's got on the whole sustainability and purpose conversation.
I really loved one of his comments, which was that career planning is a contact sport. You have to make contact with a lot of other people to realize what's right for you.
So let's get right into it. Here's Tom Rippin. Tom, great to see you. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Lovely to see you too.
Hey, Tom, really great to have you here.
Hi, Darren. Nice to see you.
Let's begin at the beginning, which in this case is a really interesting beginning because you started your entire working life on an utterly different track. Tell us about your choice of undergraduate study and your PhD and where you began.
Sure. Yeah, I've had a couple of changes over the years. So I studied sciences. I studied chemistry, and then had always thought I wanted to become an academic. That's what my family background is, academics and teachers. And so went into a PhD in cancer research. Nothing to do with patients, I hasten to add, lab work, but applying some of the chemical knowledge I had to what I perceived as a big and important problem.
Well, I would challenge you, Taimur, that that's an utterly different track because you often hear the demand for people in sustainability to have a scientific background. And so I'd love to know, are there things from having that scientific background that you apply in the work you do today?
Yeah, sure. I think it is helpful. I wouldn't say I can point to lots of direct science that I use, but I think certainly the mindset, I think the ability to navigate some of the conversations that are happening, which especially when related to climate change can get a bit scientific, is helpful. Even just knowing some of the language or being familiar with some of the language. A lot of climate change is, relates to chemistry and so on as well, of course. So just even if I don't understand the terms fully, knowing that I can understand the terms if I look them up is helpful. And obviously having an idea of what kind of, thing might qualify as more rigorous or less rigorous, I think is helpful too. It gives you a way of navigating some of the conversation that is out there. That is certainly helpful.
So you went from studying cancer and getting a PhD in biochemistry. And then what happened there? You went to McKinsey and became a consultant, right? So a fairly traditional path of making money, getting involved in the economy as it stands. Yes,
fairly traditional in the sense that McKinsey was actually quite actively recruiting PhDs at the time. So that wasn't entirely, well, it's unusual in the grand scheme of things, but they'd cottoned on to that. They were quite interested in PhD students. I guess I would say I always went into McKinsey quite explicitly with the idea of wanting to learn some private sector skills, wanting to learn, if you like, what the business world is and how it works, with the idea of then being able to apply that understanding and that experience in I would have at the time said the non-profit world. I would have probably at the time even said the international development world specifically. I thought about trying to go into that world directly after my PhD, but was skeptical of whether I would ever get a job or even an internship in the first place. And then if I did, what kind of development training, progression I would be able to have. And through conversations with a friend in particular, this idea was given to me of, well, actually, if you go and get some private sector experience first, that can be really helpful. And can make it easier to transition later on. You can maybe transition at a different point in your career and do some very interesting work. So for me, that was always the case. And I thought I'd go into consulting for maybe 2 or 3 years, like many people, maybe stayed somewhat longer than that, stayed for about 5 in the end, but eventually did make the switch.
And what kind of projects were you working on at this stage of your career? Was your work linked to purpose or sustainability, or it was more broad than that?
Well, I wanted to be working on that kind of thing, of course, but as a junior consultant, you work on all kinds.
Whatever comes your way.
Yeah, I got a wide range of experience in the private sector. I did actually a fair amount of public sector work because I was interested in that, and there was quite a lot of that happening. And I was also lucky enough to be able to do 2 pro bono projects, actually one on sustainability, or at the time we probably would have said corporate social responsibility, and one for a big international development NGO as well. So, but I was from the start kind of interested in that side of things, sort out the people within the company who were working on that kind of thing and try to do as much as possible around that to, get experience and direct knowledge, if you like, of those areas as well. And interestingly, one of the things that changed is, having gone into McKinsey thinking I'd get some skills to try and apply in international development, maybe, I came out with a desire to try and find ways to more intelligently integrate, if you like, commercial, social, and environmental approaches together. So how could you find organizations and business models that were integrating those 3 things, as opposed to some business models which, purely make commercial success happen and wealth, if you like, and then other ones which need to kind of come up and sweep up the pieces in the trail of those, in the wake of those other things. So my focus as I then was coming out of consulting was really to find places where I could work on that kind of overlap or that integration area.
So where did it lead you? What did you decide to do? Because your post-McKinsey career on your CV has a fairly broad spectrum of elements that touch on everything you just said. Is there a particular focus? Can you distill what you think you're doing now and how it engages with the sustainability agenda?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think what I do now has probably evolved somewhat from my thinking at the time when I left McKinsey. But if I maybe take it the short version in historical sequence. So when I left, I was looking for those places where I could overlap commercial and social ways of thinking. I went and worked for Comic Relief, which is a large charity, very well-known charity in the UK, for the CEO and some of the senior management team on various projects. But interestingly, although they are in some ways quite traditional charity, they operate quite commercially behind the scenes and had various projects which were ongoing, which had commercial angles to them, which is typically what I focused on.
That's the really weird standout thing in your CV that I thought, because Comic Relief in the UK, as known as Red Nose Day, right? I mean, it's a big.
I was going to say, it did stand out to me. I'm like, oh, how cool, Comic Relief.
How does that fit into the whole thing?
Yeah, sure. Well, as I say, behind the scenes, they were looking at corporate partnerships. That they raise, for example, a lot of money through big corporate partnerships in the UK through their fundraising, but they were also looking at corporate partnerships in other ways. Interestingly, they were actually incubating within the UK the next organization that I went to, which is called RED, which was an organization that did cause-related marketing, raising money from big corporates to fight AIDS in Africa, known by many people because it was founded by Bono and Bobby Shriver, and worked with brands like American Express, Giorgio Armani, Apple, you name it, lots of big brands. And that the kind of UK or non-US team, the international team, was actually incubating Comic Relief. And so I worked with them a little bit as well. And then, in fact, when they were taken out of Comic Relief, went to join that team, kind of to run them on an interim basis. Small team of 3, 4, 5 people, I think we were in total. But again, that was, that was around engaging the private sector, engaging big brands in a large social issue, which was HIV/AIDS in Africa. So that for me was the common thread. And then, as you know, around about that time, now 15 years ago or so, I founded On Purpose, which I still run today. And especially in the early days, of On Purpose. On Purpose is a 1-year leadership program that helps people transition careers into more purposeful work. And we say that we are developing leaders who are going to help transform the economy. In those early days, we very much talked about it as trying to find and develop people who would become, I sometimes called it bilingual, who would be able to speak commercial language and social language and could bring those two worlds together. The idea being that having those worlds so separated, often not even really being able to communicate very well with each other, even when they were trying to make partnerships happen, was not helpful. And we needed to find much more integrated, much more intelligent, much better ways of working together. Now, in the 15 years since starting On Purpose, our approach to that has, I would say, become more sophisticated and changed a little bit, but that's certainly where it started.
And with On Purpose, do you really see that as helping to deliver some of those social goals that you were setting out to achieve earlier on in your career? I mean, do you have people knocking down the door to be part of the program? Do you seek out people who join? How does it work?
Yeah, sure. So the answer to your first question is very much yes. Yeah, this is where I feel I have found my niche, if you like. This is how I think I and we as an organization can make the biggest difference to what needs to happen in the world. The way it works is that, as I mentioned, it's a 1-year full-time leadership program aimed at people who, it's not an age thing, but on average, they tend to be, late 20s to mid 30s. They've had a successful career to date. Often in a wide range of backgrounds, and they, for whatever reason, have identified that this is not what they want to be doing in 5 or 10 years' time. And, all the cliches come out, but they are genuinely held and true. People will say, I realized I was part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. People say, I don't just want to be making shareholder value anymore. People see, I saw the people 10 years above me in the company or the organization, and that's not what I want to turn into. And people are looking for a way to make a meaningful contribution, to the big challenges that we face in the world, and are unsure or unclear how best to make that happen. And at that point, ideally, they find out about us, they apply. We do have a lot of people apply. So, in our London programs, for example, about 10% of people who apply get onto the program. If they get through our selection process, they quit their job. So it's a big step, and they come to us full time for a year. And we organize 4 things for them. 2 6-month paid placements in a very wide range of organizations, from big corporates to small charities. But the common factor is this thinking about how do we more intelligently think about the economy? How do we more intelligently integrate social, commercial, environmental ways of working?
Before you get into the more details about the program itself, Tom, can we just talk about that transitional period mentally for those characters? Like you say, a lot of people come to a stage in their lives where they go, what I'm doing is not fulfilling me personally. It's not fulfilling my long-term goals. Tell us a little bit about that transitional process, because you have spoken at length in some cases about purpose, about personal philosophy, about giving oneself focus, about making such transitions. And you have a bit of a framework for this, right? So tell us about how you articulate to somebody in that position the process through which they should think their next steps.
Yeah, there are several things that we tend to find is helpful. Maybe the place to start is where a lot of people are at when they're kind of coming onto our program. I think a lot of people have realized they are dissatisfied with what they do. They have realized they want to do something which they might call purposeful or impactful, and they're not clear on what exactly that is. We will have people come, and I understand this, because in a way, when I was leaving McKinsey, I think I was in a similar position. They will say, you kind of say to them, well, what is it you want to do? I don't know. They come and have a coffee with me and say, I want to do something impactful, Tom. What should I do? And I say, well, that's a very difficult question to answer. Do you want to go into education? Do you want to go into, healthcare? Is it about homelessness? And they say, oh yeah, all of the above are interesting. I'm interested in all of those. Which one would you do? And that's an impossible question, because I can't answer that for people.
But I did see you doing a talk in which you did, speak about it very specifically in terms of therapy. You had this this psychoanalytical metaphor going on where you have to give yourself therapy and then seek therapy in a broader context in order to find purpose and that kind of thing.
Yes, and I mean, a few of the things that we come to, maybe to start with your therapy point. One, which this is not, I think, where necessarily people start, but where I hope people can get to, is that for me, the places where we need transformations in our economy, in our society, in our organizations are all over the place. So actually, I wouldn't say you have to go into this and that sector or this size of organization or not. We need change everywhere. For me, the really important bit is the quality of change that we're trying to bring about. And specifically, that change needs to be not just incremental change of trying to improve our current system by another 10% or another 15%, shave a little bit of our carbon footprint or whatever it might be. What we need is people who are going to make change happen, and that change needs to be rooted in a genuinely different way of understanding, at the very basic level, understanding the world, and ultimately a different way of understanding how our economy works, and hence how organizations should and can work. So if you really boil it down, and I give you the kind of straight to the target answer, I would say, you can go and make change happen anywhere, but make sure that the change you're trying to bring about is rooted in a genuinely different way of thinking about the world. To use the technical word, a different paradigm. Now, I've shortcut a whole bunch of stuff in there, but to give you a bit of a flavor of what that might be, that means, we can't, I believe, have an economy or a setup of organizations who are indefinitely trying to maximize their growth, maximize their profits, etc., etc. So what are the alternatives to that? And the interesting thing is there are thousands of organizations out there already now who do not, in reality, conform to our traditional way of how one thinks business ought to happen. That, if someone who's been through a classical MBA or something was to look at an organization, they would go, that's balmy. Why do they do that? That shouldn't even be possible. That company should not survive. But actually, there are hundreds and thousands of examples all around the world of organizations who are already working differently. Those are the ones that I go, that's really exciting. I don't even have a strong opinion necessarily on what is, in inverted commas, right or wrong. I'm primarily interested in organizations experimenting with very different approaches, because it's through that collective experimentation of trying to do things differently and rooted in a different set of beliefs that ultimately we're going to find different ways of running organizations, which is then ultimately going to help us transform our whole organization as well. And in very short, at On Purpose, what we're trying to do is develop the people who are going to go out and make some of those, catalyze, make happen, amplify some of those experiments that are already ongoing.
So I have two questions coming out of that. The first is, do most people complete their 1-year course? Or do you have people who say, actually, I realized I completely love the capitalist system. I'm going back to it. Thanks for your time. And then the second question is, do you have a challenge finding those organizations who are working purposefully for people to do the placements in?
So the vast majority of people complete the course. We have just this October, our 1,000th person has come on to the program, and people have not, I can't give you the exact statistics, but, people have not completed the course, below in total somewhere between 20 and 50 of those 1,000 people. And they do not complete the course sometimes for various reasons. Very occasionally they drop out of their own volition. Sometimes it doesn't work out on the program, as in there are difficulties between them and the organization they're working in, etc. So there's a range of people why people do drop out, but the number of people dropping out is extremely low. Do people then go back into more traditional roles after the program? Yes, some. The vast majority, from some numbers we've run, it's because it's such a not very clearly defined space, it's not easy to say, but 85 to 95% of people are working in what they will call purpose-driven jobs afterwards. Even those who might say, well, I've gone back into a more traditional role, we think and we believe that we have planted enough of a seed in their minds during the year that they've been with us that they will do things a little bit differently wherever they're working, or in a few years' time, they might kind of go back to a more overtly sustainable or regenerative or impactful job or purposeful job, whatever you want to call it. So, we're not sitting here and saying, actually, everyone after the program needs to be working in this and this and this space, although the vast majority of people do go into broadly defined purposeful work. But even if they don't, we think that'll still have an impact.
The companies where they go to do that work experience, how do you find them?
So we find them ultimately, it's through having a very strong network in the cities that we work in. So we work in London, Paris, and Berlin. We do have to put a lot of work into it. We do have to find people. We do have to persuade people. And, yes, we do need to put a lot of effort into that. We do need to network. Ultimately, we stand and fall on the people that we have on our program and that we put into these organizations, because the organizations go, wow, these are great people. And they come and they think a little bit differently. And that's quite exciting for us. And so, we managed to persuade them first time around that there is a little bit of trust involved. They have to probably, like the people coming onto the program, the organizations also need to take a bit of a leap of faith. But what we see is that actually we have a lot of repeat business. So people come back multiple times. They realize that, this is a great source of talent and fantastic people, and maybe people who are a little bit different from who they could normally recruit in their own processes.
How has that employment dynamic changed over the years that you've been running On Purpose, in terms of both the number of people coming to you and wanting to change their careers and take the course? Are you finding a growing number and a growing awareness amongst employees for that, and of the companies that you recruit to help you with this? Are you finding more companies thinking we actually need to start getting into the kind of mindset that the On Purpose program is promoting?
So yes, we do certainly find that people coming, how to describe it is that the people coming onto the program have a higher level of knowledge these days than they used to have around these kind of issues of, be it sustainability or regeneration or impact, whatever you want to call it. So I'd say on average, the savviness of the people coming onto the program has increased, so that, which is great. People are more aware of these topics before they even come to us. We've had a high level of applications and, lots of people wanting to do the program from the beginning. I would be telling a fib if I told you that it's just grown exponentially since we started. Actually, what we found is that it grew strongly at the beginning, and then it's actually kind of stayed strong, but, roughly stable kind of since then. So we have a good and steady pipeline of people. And that pipeline, I would say, is becoming more sophisticated as we go through the years, which is great to see. And on the organizations, again, yes. So in the early days of starting up any one of our 3 cities, that is very much the limiting factor, being able to find the organizations first. And as we build our networks, as we get more people, more organizations who've done the program and come back, that becomes easier with time. I'd say then actually probably the biggest factor beyond that then is probably kind of macroeconomic circumstances, where we see that depending on how things are going in the wider economy, depending on, I don't know, how different sectors of the economy are affected by funding cuts or kind of economic circumstance or whatever, that might knock onto us a little bit as well. But the fluctuations are kind of we can accommodate for those when our networks are strong enough.
There's an awfully large number, growing number of courses out there now for people wanting to make change. A lot of them are sort of skills-based and qualifications-based and specific, focusing specifically on tasks and roles within this growing sustainability environment. How do you differentiate your course? I mean, when you talk to potential students and enrollees, how do you differentiate yours, and how does yours sit alongside those?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there is an ever-growing list of those. I mean, when we started, we were probably one of the few. We weren't the only ones. There were some other ones around as well, but there are more now, definitely. I'd say that we differentiate ourselves in different ways depending on who you're talking about. But, one is certainly that we are, a year of full time. You are actually working 4.5 days a week. So it's very practical, very applied. What you're learning is you're applying immediately in what you're doing. It is paid, which I think is maybe not entirely unique anymore, but is, I think, probably still almost unique. So you're actually being paid to learn, rather than having to pay tens of thousands of pounds or dollars to do a master's program, for example. You are being paid to learn on our program. Even though the actual kind of contact learning time of training, mentoring, coaching, the number of hours you get with us may not be that different from some of these master's programs as well. The people you get exposed to on our program are practitioners. So the people, excuse me, who come in on a Friday afternoon, for example, and might give you a session on anything from systems change to impact management to some quite traditional commercial topics as well, are people actually doing this in organizations out there. They are typically not academics. So that is also quite a different approach. And you have this very strong kind of peer network and this idea of learning happens in a group. We limit our program sizes at about 20 people, because if you go much beyond that, the group starts fracturing, I think. And so that idea of learning intensively with a small group of people with a lot of support, getting thrown in the deep end in the placements that you're doing, but the deep end with a lot of support to make you successful.
So one last question from me. I was really interested as I was researching for today's session. I looked on your LinkedIn profile, and obviously LinkedIn is how a lot of us present ourselves to the world from a professional perspective. And your profile was actually really clean and easy to read. And I say that because by the time many of us have had multiple career pivots, your profile starts to get stacked up with so many different things that it becomes really complex to understand what you do and what you're about. How do you go through that process of thinking about how are you presenting yourself to the world when you've had multiple career pivots?
I think there's maybe a couple of angles. So one is being able to tell the story, so why did what happen, and I remember someone early on telling me, it doesn't matter if you have career changes, you can always explain the story that it happened. There's always a reason for them. So I think sometimes people are worried about, I shouldn't have a career change because that'll look odd on my CV. I don't subscribe to that. As long as you can tell the story around why it happened, and there is always a story, otherwise it wouldn't have happened, that is okay. I think maybe secondly is to be aware of, what are the themes and that have stayed the same. So for me, certainly from quite early on, this idea of thinking there must be a kind of more intelligent way of organizing our economy and the organizations that are, how do we not separate, the organizations that make social impact and the organizations that are trying to create, economic success? How do we bring those together more intelligently? That is, I think, a theme that has kind of maintained itself throughout several of my career changes. And so being able to kind of tell that story is helpful too. And then thirdly and lastly, but this goes for anything, and I hope my LinkedIn profile conforms reasonably enough to this, is to be able to use just simple language, not too much jargon, and imagine you were writing it for your grandmother or whoever doesn't normally kind of operate or work in your area. Because then people from other areas and other industries who won't be familiar with the jargon in your particular area might be more likely to be able to understand it and pick up on it as well.
What do you say to the enrollees or the applicants to your course who are still at the very beginning of this journey? I mean, we talked a little bit about, personal therapy and how you perceive the world. But, for those people who feel intimidated and worried about their earnings potential, their career potential, their entire life path in this context, what are the tips you would give to people who are thinking, I want to make a difference, but I'm not quite sure how I configure my life for this next step?
One is that you do not have to decide what the rest of your career is going to be now. All you have to decide is what the next 2 or 3 years are going to be. So you need to find something that you're, excited and inspired by enough and believe in enough to do for a number of years. If you then decide you want to do something completely different again, that's fine and not a problem. For me, that took a lot of pressure off that whole thinking process. The second one is that trying to figure out what you want to do is a contact sport. You are not going to figure this out by sitting at your kitchen table and doing a pros and cons list. You need to go out and, as far as possible, experience what it might be like. That could be doing our program, where you precisely get a lot of opportunity to do that, or it could be going out and volunteering somewhere in a kind of organization that you might be interested in, or going and doing some volunteering somewhere. Or it could just be actually going and meeting some people for coffee and having a chat. That can already give you an amazing amount of insight, more than if you're kind of looking at an organization from the outside and wondering what it might be to work there. So trying to up that level of experience that you've had of the kinds of things you might be interested in is incredibly valuable. And that's, what I would focus on. You then have so much more to go on when you're making a decision. And that will help you, and this is an important thing, narrow down what you're looking for, so that if you then ever do go for coffee with someone, with myself or someone else who you might be asking for career advice, I always say, don't come and say, I want to have an impactful career, what should I do? Come and say, I figured out, I kind of really think I like organization, trying to solve problems in organizations that are trying to scale, because, that's really fascinating to me. There are 2 or 3 kind of areas, young people, whatever that I'm interested in. I probably need to be based in this country or this city. And ironically, and this is what people often don't understand, the more specific you can be, the more I can help you. The more vague you are, the more difficult it is for me to help you. If being that specific is really difficult, you can always have 2 or maybe even 3 options about which you are specific, and try out which one works for you. That's fine too. But don't just go, I'm trying to do something purposeful or impactful. I think that's not helpful to yourself, and it's not helpful to other people that you might be asking for help.
All right. Tom, that's fantastic.
That's been really wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Tom.
Thanks for having me on. It's been lovely.
Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Thanks for watching. Now, the whole purpose of this series is to be able to inspire others to take action to make their careers more green, and to think about how they can influence the green agenda within the companies that they already work for. And I hope if you are inspired at all, then you'll get in touch and engage with us a bit.
Now, we know just from speaking with all of our guests that this can sometimes be a minefield. It's hard to know where to start, what are the best courses, what are the best sources of information. So if you'd like to get in contact, please email us on the email below or contact us through LinkedIn.
And if you have any thoughts about kind of subjects you'd like to hear us discuss, or people or industries that you'd like featured on the conversation, let us know about that as well. Get in touch.
Thank you.